talking about the off and the on. As athletes, we know how to effort, but do we know how to put in anti-effort, so to speak? In all areas of an athlete's life, we need to learn how to switch it on, and we do. We go hard or we go home. That's the philosophy, isn't it? But can it be just as damaging as it can be helpful? That's the question. And I think the answer is yes. And if we think of ourselves as an athletic water well, right? The well has only so much water in it. And if you're constantly siphoning out water without replenishing it, sooner or later, the well's going to run dry. And that's the fact of it. And this is true of both our physiology and our psychology. It's a balance of on and off. It can't be one or the other. So when the balance is out, we see an oversupply of stress in all its forms, physically and psychologically. The two go together. So there's a draining of that well. And physically, we see the stress manifest itself as, let's just say, stress fractures, sickness, chronic fatigue, glandular fever, to name a few of the nasties that we put up with when we push ourselves to the edge. And, you know, words are used to separate the physical form from the psychological. However, the system is one and it's the same. It's not one or the other. It's the two sides of the one coin, and you're the one. So, you know, even mathematically, we say we can never divide the two into one. But in this case, it's not true. Like on and off, physical, psychological are two parts of a fine balance which occur in one. The psychological mirror of the physicality can look like, let's say, depression, anxiety, obsessive thoughts, eating disorders, to name a few of those psychological nasties that we put up with as athletes. And they often come in tandem with that physical list that I mentioned, just earlier there. So it's two parts of the one. It's like it's swiveling on the one. So as athletes, if we're only willing to look at the physical stresses, then we're only looking at half of the picture, and vice versa. If we're only looking at the psychological aspects and we're ignoring the physical aspects, aren't we? And do you know that it's the same thing? So we need to take in the whole picture. Physically in training, we have to learn to find the off phase within the on phase. Again, they're two parts of an important one. You know, we are phasing. If we want the best from ourselves, we need to firstly realize it, and then to work out how to get the best from this phasing system of on and off. And we need to think of ourselves as on and off. And can we be off in the on? And the answer is yes, we can. You know, there has to be an off phase, at least somewhere where the body can save some energy. You know, the mind is no different. It can be constantly on. It can't be constantly on, sorry. But then, you know, we try, don't we? We overanalyze, we obsess, we grip things, we spin them around in our heads. And what good does it to us? An obsession will lead to regression. So let's use some of the physical cues. So running, for example, we have to learn to use the inertia, the physical inertia, which takes a mental effort. You know, a slight downhill lean, relaxing and letting the cadence come, leaning from the ankles, from the sternum, which provides free speed and relaxation that comes from increased foot strike, and turnover provided by gravity itself. That's a physical law. And if we don't know that, we're not using the off phase. And, you know, I've stood and watched a lot of races where people are leaning back and not using gravity to their advantage. Another example is the recovery phase in the swim stroke should be just that. It should be off. You know, it shouldn't be on. We need to use the mechanical leverage to provide an off phase. You know, is that off phase relaxed before we put it to the on phase again? And if you can't find catch and leverage without an off phase before it, then basically you're pushing poo uphill. You know, wear yourself out really quickly. So my point here is forget what it looks like and start finding a way to get it with your physiology. to use your leverage, to use your off phase, to use your recovery phase. And athletes have this idea that overcoming the process is only provided by physical force of the on phase. And it's not true. It's like a bow and arrow. If you don't pull back on the bow, the arrow isn't going to fly very far, is it? It's just going to fall straight out of the bow onto the ground. So often athletes get stuck in the on phase, and as a consequence find themselves stuck in a development black hole, plateaued with nowhere to go, which they understandably get frustrated with, and invariably, you know, throw even more training at it, more physical training at it, where it might simply be a case of focusing more on the off than they're focusing on the on, so they can get a homeostasis in this training picture. You know, the arrow just keeps dropping to the ground. Well, of course it does. You know, there is no energy built up in it. Where's it going to fly to? Training is not just a game of on, it's as much as of off as it is on. And if you really want to know the nature of what is physically possible, then you need to find out what going at speed is like when you're off at the same time. We have this idea we can't do that. It's not true. It's not true. We can have off going hard. We can. We just need to apply the mental cues and the physical relaxation that comes from those mental cues. And I'm going to give you a bike example now. And this one's a major key, on, off at the same time. Let's say you're halfway through an individual time trial. Physically, the glutes are on, the legs are on, the core is on, and at the very same time, the upper body should be off. The upper body should be relaxed, down-regulated. You know, the neck should be relaxed and the face should be off and relaxed. Not pulling these faces of tension. We don't need that. And if you're pulling a face like a kid on a roller coaster, gripping the bars for grim death and rocking and rolling like a drunk after happy hour, then you're wasting a lot of energy, aren't you? It's just common sense. But it's just to look at it. It's not to make it wrong. It's not to judge it. It's just to have a little exploration in here. You know, if you're not pulling back on that bow, weakness is actually then a byproduct of too much on. And if we're taking a stiff upper lip approach and just trying to overcome the process with pure brawn, we can see how the exhaustion manifests itself. It's not going to be long before you need to lay down. And it's not going to be long before you need to lay down for an extended period of time because you're just overworked and overtrained. So taking a psychological approach, a raw mental toughness attitude is no different. It's often an oxymoron. You end up with the opposite of what you're trying to get. Instead of getting mentally tough, you get mentally weak because there's no off in the on. And you can bullshit yourself or others, but you can't bullshit and hide from yourself. You know, it's about homeostasis. Weakness often cloaks itself in toughness and vice versa. The answer is to apply liberal amounts of awareness to the whole process, to the whole thing, right? And did you know there's always a key question in this component of on and off that we must explore? How does it contribute? Explore your off and your on in equal amounts. Use them because it's all on. And then if it's like that, you'll soon be aware that it's all off. So balance yourself out. Thanks for listening.